Hey, everybody, welcome back to a new episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue Podcast. On this episode, we welcome back Eddie Alterman, the Chief Brand Officer for Hearst Autos and one of the nicest guys in the industry. Eddie, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Thanks, Musto. Thanks for having me on. And I can say the same thing about you.
Well, today we're going to talk about our, let's see, not our, but what is a great first collector car for people who want to get into the hobby? Cars that are might not break the bank going in. We'll talk about the financials, the pitfalls, how to find the right car, ancillary costs, reliability, and everything that goes with it. I mean, the whole goal is to basically tell everybody out there who's ever thought about buying an older car, collector car, what they're getting into. Because I think so many people out there dive into this hobby and they're all, they got eyes as wide as saucers, and then they get there and they're like, this is the worst.
Yeah, right. It's like what they say about buying a boat.
Oh,
2 days, the first day when you buy it and the last day when you sell it. But it doesn't have to be that way,
Right.
And, one of the things, Mike, I think that is a problem sort of going in for a lot of people is they expect it to be an investment. They expect to make money on the back.
Right.
And they don't realize that, that's sort of the wrong, to me at least, and this might be heresy, but it's kind of the wrong way to think about it. Like,
I agree.
You got to do it for, a different kind of reward, for the joy of it, because you're going to there's going to be pitfalls, and you're going to be spending money that you didn't expect to spend, and you're probably going to be upside down. It's very, very rare for a kind of first sort of budget collector car to really kind of go hog wild. I mean, we all know the story about the Civic Si that made $1,000 on Bring a Trailer.
Right.
But in general, like, your motivations have to be pure. You know what I mean? You got to do it for the love of the game. And you got to get into it because, like, I think about it this way. Okay, there's this top tier of collectibles, your Mercedes SSKs, your Gullwings, your front engine V12 two-seat Ferraris. Those are always going to be worth a ton of money. You'll never be able to get into those as a normal person. Racing Alphas, pre-war Alphas, stuff like that. It's just, that's Pebble Beach stuff, right?
Right.
The other tier sort of follows along with, on a 30-year lag based on all the stuff we wanted in high school.
That's right.
Right? And so it's like, you buy these cars as an opportunity to, like, date the person that you never got to date in high school.
That's right. That's it.
You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
I have a little bit of money. I might not have any hair anymore, but I know how to present myself. I don't have anymore. I know how to wear a suit. Like, now I can afford to get, like, a nice car and be reunited with the thing I always wanted in high school. Had the poster of the Integra or the 944 Turbo on my wall. It was so beyond reach, so aspirational, but now I can get one. And to me, that's what it's about. Like, if you go back and date the person that you wanted to date in high school, there's going to be some serious emotional and financial pitfalls.
Oh yeah, it's
you got to be prepared for it.
It's a black hole, man. However, I think you're absolutely right. If you know that going in, right? If you know that as soon as you pull the trigger, your emotional status is going to turn into a tornado, you're fine. You're totally fine, right? Because
you have to be prepared for the anxiety and the fact that, oh shit, like, something's going to go wrong. But that's kind of the fun part. And when things go wrong, that's when, like, that's when you have the experience. That's when you call on your friends. That's when you that's when you find out you can actually fix it.
Right.
And and that's the beauty of that experience. Like, I think if you buy a 911, you buy a 993 to make money on it, you'll probably make money. But it's expensive to repair.
That's right.
And you might wind up upside down. And if your whole goal is to make money on it, the joy is lost. You have to buy what you love.
I agree with that 100%. And the other thing to highlight is that, there's a big difference between buying a collector car to enjoy and and experience as opposed to trying to flip cars. That's
Right.
something completely different, right? Because like, listen, I have bought and sold cars to flip and make some money on. But in order to do that, you have to really know the market. You have to understand what you're buying. Service history is key. That is a much more research intensive endeavor if you're going to jump in like that, right? If you're really buying a car for profit. If you're buying a collector car or a classic car, that's an emotional purchase.
Yeah.
That's something where the research part of your brain shuts off, and all of a sudden all the the little birdies from Disney like start flying around your head and make you happy, and you're just like, well, I obviously have to have this, and it doesn't matter, I don't care what the consequences are, right?
Right.
That's
And those investment flip cars, you're buying not the best car you can afford, you're buying the best car you can't afford, because you know you're going to make something on the back end, and you're sort of like, okay, there's going to be some pain here, but I'm going to,
right.
I researched it, I'm going to get something really incredible. A car that you're buying for yourself to as like a time machine to go back in time and to get something you really lusted after in your or lust after now because you learned about it, that you can buy at sort of any grade depending on your mechanical kind of appetites for repair and stuff like that.
I think you just made one of the best statements I've ever heard. You're buying the car you can't afford, right? And I think that is such a spot on statement, because so many of us, for the most part, we, a lot of these things, like I had entertained like 6 months ago buying a Testarossa.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember us talking about that, right?
Yeah. And I got really annoyed. And I shouldn't have. I don't know why I did. One, I got annoyed at the owner because like he led me down this path and then he gave me a price that was just so far in the stratosphere, right? And I was like, what are you, out of your mind? But he did, and that's fine. But then I started to kind of backpedal a little bit and said, well, what if I had bought it for the price that I wanted to get it at, right? I was looking at it as an investment car. And then I started adding up all the ancillary costs that it would have cost me in my head. The insurance, the cost of plug wires, which are $2,500, the cost of an engine out service, which is 18 to 25 grand.
Exactly.
And I'm going, well, maybe I dodged a bullet here.
You did. You did.
Yeah. Whereby, like when I bought my 68 Charger, like almost 20 years ago now, I didn't buy that to make $1. I bought it because I just wanted it.
Right.
And
it's a platform, right?
Yeah.
You can go to Napa and get everything you need.
Yeah. Right.
And there's no guy fleecing you. Like the Testarossa is kind of like a blind service item. Like you don't know what it's supposed to cost. It depends on what that guy owes his bookie. And there's no like, hey man, I could do this myself. You can't do that with that car. With that, you got that like fiddly Motronic, I think 2 system in that, and you're like, what are we dealing with? All these black,
that's right,
and you don't want to wade in there too deep, and that's another thing. Like there are kind of solid state cars, and then there are tube cars. There are analog cars and digital cars, and when you get into, the sort of what I think of as the peak right now, the convergence of a lot of guys who are now 30 years out of high school or 25 years out of high school. Still, the cars are still sort of analog in some ways, and still fixable and still tweakable and modifiable, and you can customize it. I think about the early 2000s. I think about so many of those great Japanese cars from that era. Yeah, they're much more complex than, like the B bodies that we're talking about earlier. Of course. But there's still an ability to tweak those cars and do it. And there's so many people to service them. It's not like buying a Testarossa where you're just like, oh man, I hope this goes well.
Right. Well, to that point, and that's a brilliant point. I mean, one of the other things that I look at, and I'm sure you do the same thing, right? We all look at the cars that we wanted. And so of course I shifted from the Testarossa because I was just like, well, I'm an idiot. I'm obviously can't do that. But what about like a 300ZX twin turbo?
Right. Amazing car. Remember?
Right.
I mean,
loved it.
I remember driving that thing in 1993, I think it was.
Mhm.
When, is that when that came out? 92
I
or
think
90?
so. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think so. The first gen, yeah.
it was such a revelation
Mhm.
because here was like real sort of supercar at that time,
Yeah, that's
or
right.
in a really beautiful body that was
Right,
comfortable to be in, easy to see out of, easy to drive,
right.
light control feel, just like effortless, beautiful in that
Yep.
Japanese way, and just so damn cool. Oh my God. It was like, to me, that was a supercar. I would have had that over a 911 in some ways.
Oh, I
Time.
I look at those cars now, and it's interesting because the values have skyrocketed on those, right?
Yeah.
I feel like 6, 7 years ago, you could still pick one up for in the teens, like low teens, and they were still very affordable. Now you see a really nice twin turbo Z, and they're 40 grand,
Yeah.
and I'm like, Jesus, which is fine. I'm glad to see that the cars are really getting the due that they deserve because they really are beautiful, beautiful cars. But it's in that time frame of that late 80s, early 90s to mid 90s where, like you said, like an old Chrysler B body or an old Monte Carlo, you could go in there with some zip ties, duct tape, and a wrench and basically fix anything you want,
Get it to
right?
95%.
Right, right. You get to 95%. But something like a twin turbo Z from the 90s, you better do your research on that.
I'm
And
calling the
you better,
professionals. And you better have a guy, you know.
oh, dude, you got to have a guy. You don't have a guy, you're straight up screwed, right?
Exactly. No, that's maybe one of, like, that's point number one.
Mhm.
Before you buy anything, have a guy. Like,
Yeah,
especially
right.
if we're talking about cars of, the late 90s, 2000s, and,
Right,
and newer, have a guy.
right. Well, it,
Definitely.
it goes to, I mean, when you look at how the technology has progressed, in the early 80s when fuel injection was coming out, everybody was like, fuel injection, blah, I'm gonna have my carburetor, it's infinitely tunable and all this other stuff.
Right.
Carburetors are crap. Yes, they work, but they're a pain in the ass. Okay. Um, Early EFI worked, still kind of a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But if you're buying, and we just went through this with a Camaro that we built, you know, you're talking mid 80s electronics, trying to meld that with 2022 technology if you're doing a motor transplant.
Uh,
And it can be a nightmare. And I know that, like, when I think of cars from the late 80s and the 90s, in my head, they're like 10, 12 years old. They're 35 years old.
I know. I know. Isn't that a terrible realization? You're like, that
Right.
car's not old. Yeah, it's 30
Yeah.
years old.
It is. You know why? Because I'm 50 and I look 50. And I look at
The
those
same
cars now and I'm
way.
like, son of a bitch, they are.
They
I
still
don't know.
look great, but it's like being in the 90s and looking back at cars of the 60s and going, oh, that's so old. That's the same
Yeah,
exact
but
time span.
for some reason, if you look at the disconnect between, all right, so take like a 69 Chevelle, right?
Yeah.
A 69 Chevelle, if you see one driving on the street today, you go, you know what? That's a nice car. And it, for some reason, I mean, yeah, it's 50 plus years old. It's 54 years old or whatever it is. You're going, that's an old car, but it doesn't look, it still feels, I don't know, not 50 plus years old for some reason.
It has something youthful about it. Like, all those muscle cars to me still feel like real relevant. I don't know, because they're fast, you know.
Right. Right. But if you look at a car, say you take a 69 Chevelle and then you lop off 50 years. Okay. Now
Yeah,
you're talking something from 1920
I know. Isn't that crazy? Like a
and
brass car.
a brass era car. So you're looking at that time span and you're going, well, shit. Like that, as opposed to now looking 50 years back, you're like, well, it's a 69 Chevelle. I can still buy it's still in my mind very desirable, very updatable, very this, where, I look at I can't imagine buying a 69 Chevelle in 69 and being like, yeah, I can't wait to get that 1921, whatever the hell. Like,
I know. But if you think about it historically, like, the first 70 years, 80 years of the century were about actually kind of perfecting the product. And
Right.
then the last 40 years to now, or 30 years to now, are like really refining it and making it
Yeah.
like making it perfect. I shouldn't say it's perfecting the product. It's sort of like evolving the product to really be safe and to suit like consumer needs. But now it's really just smaller tweaks. So we're like at the end of that asymptote. Like that's why to me, like a 90s or 2000s car feels brand new because like
Right.
they're better in some ways. Like I'd rather have an
Yeah.
E46 dude than a new M3 every
Yeah.
week. I'd rather have an E39 M5. We talked about this
Yeah.
than the new M5 because
Right.
it just feels better on the road to me in some
Yeah.
ways. More connected. There's no
Yeah.
like power steering. There's not all this electronic, intermediation. And it's like to your original point, trying to marry those two things, like from that era where they were just sort of trying to, perfect the thing and evolve it
Yeah.
rather than refine it. It's like trying to make a Sony Walkman into an iPhone. You just
Right.
can't do it,
Right.
two
Yeah.
sort of different things. And it's almost like those to me are sort of two eras, like the cars you can work on, the cars that are sort of like, very, very deeply analog
Yeah.
versus the last sort of 30, 40 years where you need a guy.
So is that your sweet spot then? Say 90s to early 2000s or late 80s to early 2000s. Is that where the Eddie Alterman automotive like
Yeah, because
swirl?
dude, I graduated high school like you in '89, and
Yeah.
like
Yep.
that's what I wanted. That I saw that 300ZX twin turbo in college. In fact, I drove that thing when I was working at Automobile Magazine in college, and I was like, yeah, dude, I got to get here one day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm totally plugged into that era and love that era of cars. But that was kind of a transitional era. I mean, remember, we're
Yeah.
coming out of, the super emissions restrained cars of the 70s. And it took the industry a good 10, 15 years to get to the point where they had perfected all the kind of electronic stuff, all the low friction stuff, and they had got
Right.
cars that were efficient, but also fun to drive.
Right.
And cars like that 124 Mercedes 300E was sort of a landmark in like a car that didn't have a ton of power. It had like 177 horsepower. It was really fun to drive, and it was really
Right.
soundly built and great, and like it felt truly modern. Like a
Right.
real, to me, that was like the point of that's where the modern era started for me.
Right.
Sort of
Right.
86 W124. And then you just saw the thing kind of skyrocket. And like, remember when cars had rattles?
Oh God, yeah. Oh,
Right?
oh yeah.
They don't rattle anymore. Remember
Uh-uh.
when like AC didn't work and like
Oh yeah.
you had to bleed your brakes? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's all like they fixed all that maintenance stuff. And I really give
Yeah.
credit to the Japanese brands for lifting the bar for everybody. So to
Yeah.
me, that is a real sweet spot in cars like the FDRX7 and
Mm-hmm.
I was never really a super guy because
Yeah.
I think I wasn't confident enough to pull off a car like that.
I couldn't do that. I was a 300ZX guy. Like I felt I could have flowed with that car, but a Supra, I
Kinship.
wasn't like I wasn't macho enough to drive that car. Like I couldn't.
If you were macho enough, think about me.
I could like it was funny. Like back then, and it was funny. I had an 84 or 85 300ZX, and it was. It must have been an 84 because it was a dual badged car. It said Datsun on one side and Nissan on the other, right? It was when they transitioned over. And back then, 160 horsepower V6, digital dash, it talked to you, your door is ajar, and all that other.
Dude, that was a
crazy
C4 Corvette from Japan.
That's right. And that was a fun car. And then we got into, like you said, the next generation Z came out and the Supra came out, and the price elevation from the previous generation Z or Supra was like 30% higher.
Gigantic. They went up to $40,000.
$40,000. And back then everybody's like $40,000. I'm not paying. Like, what are you crazy? Like for that?
I know.
Right?
I know.
But when you look at the technology in that car compared to what the previous model was, it was like you said, it was such a massive leap forward. Massive.
Huge.
Right?
Yeah, it was. And some of that was financial, like the Japanese economy tanked.
Mm-hmm.
And the yen got super, super weak. The yen was super strong, and so they could
Right.
bring in cars like the LS400 for 35 grand.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, like, that was E-Class pricing. So all of a sudden, for those sports cars that were supposed to be fun third cars to jump to 40 grand, everybody had a heart attack.
Right.
But they had so much tech and so much amazing quality in them. But you bring up a super important point, Musto, which is digital dash. Just avoid it, man. Don't buy a car.
Not okay.
Not okay.
Not okay. Like,
that's our Walkman iPhone.
Yeah, it really is. And it's like, I'll even equate that to the boat. Like, it's great. Like, you don't want a boat, and I used to have one. I don't want another one. You know, it's great having a friend that's got a boat.
Exactly.
Because then you just give them a couple of bucks for gas, and you're like, let's go out for the day. And then they deal with the bullshit that goes along with ownership, right?
Exactly.
And, you know, so that is, I think that's a great point. The other thing is, when you're going to get into, I think, one of your first collector cars, right? Like, I always tell people, one, you have to know what you're buying, and two, you better have a cash, like a stash of money on the side, because say if you're going to, like, a 944 turbo, a brilliant car, fun car, compact, fast, light, fun, handles beautifully. If the car is, say you're going to get a really nice one, and you're going to pay 25 grand, 30 grand, whatever it's going to cost you. Have another 6K in reserve.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So go into it that this is a $45,000 car.
Right.
Because
you need to budget kind of sometimes 50% of the price of the car. Right. And if you're buying a 928, the exact price of the car.
The exact, which I went, yep, did that. Been there, done that. Yep. Yeah.
Right. No, that's a huge, I think that's our point number 2, is that keep some powder dry.
Right.
You have to, because buying it, registering it, even if you title it in Montana or license it in Montana,
it's gonna come back.
It's gonna come back. And you just need some extra dough, because stuff happens, and some of it you can't fix yourself. And you might realize, oh, wait a second, you know what? This thing is rusting out, and I really need a good bodywork person, or I want to keep this car a long time, and it's worth the investment, and it's special to me, you know.
Right.
But there's so much good stuff out there. Like, that whole, you know, all the eras are great, but that era that we were talking about, when the Japanese were really coming online with great performance cars that were more than 280 PS, undeclared horsepower.
Right.
I mean, they are great, but, you know, they do rust out. You need to put money into these things, and it's not just like you're done. It's like think about it this way. You have a big pile of cash in your garage. That's what the car represents. Right. And every night, fairies fly in there and steal some of it.
Take a little bet. The automotive fairies, they're like the mafia, right? They always want the vig on the back end. They always want a little taste.
Exactly.
Right? You pull it into the garage, little taste.
You're never getting out easy. It's always, there's going to be some pain. You just got to work with the pain, and you got to accept that as part of the process, and the anxiety is part of the process. I mean, look, if you want a fridge, buy a Toyota. If you want something where people go, oh, wow, oh my God, and you can kind of build some of your recreation time around this car, then it's worth it, you know? Like, what else is the money there to spend on? It's for joy.
Right. And that's another great point. It's like I tell friends of mine, because they're just like, well, you've got, you know, these cars, and how much money have you spent? I go, there are certain cars that I don't care. Right. Like my Charger, my Daytona, I will have those cars, hopefully, knock on wood, forever. So the money that I put into those cars it doesn't matter to me. Right. Now, I'm not going to be an idiot and dump a ton of money, or at least in my head. I mean, and I will never, ever, ever add up the receipts that I've spent.
No, don't do that.
Right.
That's
poor.
4, I think.
That's true. Don't never add the receipts. Right. Don't even get a receipt. In fact, let's just go down there. Don't even get a receipt. This way you don't even know.
Just get a work order. Just get an estimate.
Right. Because that's money that I'm spending for my own mental health and enjoyment.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. And that's a great way to look at it. It's for enjoyment, for mental health. Like, you don't think about how much money you're spending on your dog or what it
No.
takes to feed your dog, right? Because that's like,
Right.
it's a huge part of your life. It's a companion.
Right.
And it's like, you know, this is how you define yourself, right?
Right.
Through what you own and some, like the cars you drive in some ways.
Right.
Much
Well,
more so than your house or anything like that.
yeah, and it is a weird psychological thing, because I know it was interesting. I just had all my cars kind of reappraised for insurance reasons. And the insurance company came back to me with numbers. I was super low on my estimates, and they were like, "Oh no." They're like, "We're putting this at X and we're putting this at Y." And I was like, "Are you really? That's like a house price." And they were like, "Well, no, that's where it should be." And I'm like, "Shit." Because and it's a wonderful thing to know that, yes, okay, fine, if God forbid something happens, I'm covered. But I have this now internal struggle, which I'm really basically going to throw it to the wind, because I've never lived this way. I always try to enjoy everything I have. I don't worry about consequence. I will take my cars and I will drive them across the country. I will drive them to I will race them. I will do anything I want. Is there an intrinsic value there? Absolutely. There's no question. But like you said, I didn't buy them. We don't buy them for the value. We buy them for the amount of smiles it puts on our faces. And if we don't drive them, there's no point.
Exactly. And that's a real friction point between like the money side of it and the joy side of it. And you got to reconcile that in your mind. And I think you're doing it exactly the right way. It's like, I don't care what these things are worth. I don't care what an insurance guy tells me they're worth. To me, they have a whole different set of value, or a whole different value proposition, you know? And it's like, because I use them, because this is how I have fun. And this is how I like meet interesting people and have cool discussions, right?
Right.
And it's a social connector in so many ways. You know, you meet really cool car people and you learn stuff, and you're out there in the world instead of, you know, just virtually kind of hunting for cars online to see what you're going to make money on. Like, that's not to me. To me,
no,
it's about just gathering and being.
I absolutely. Another point that I want to bring up is that if you're looking at your first collector car, look at what the car is from a reliability standpoint.
100%.
Right. So if, for instance, if you're going to go out and you're going to buy, you know, a 68 Camaro, right? It's whatever, small block 3, it's got 17 moving parts. You could fix that in your driveway.
Exactly.
Not a big deal, right? If you're going to buy something German from the mid 80s, well, now you've got something where you might not be able to work on, and you might not be able to get every part that you need. So will you really get the enjoyment out of it that you think you will? Like my 928, that car, I felt like I was always one shift away from 10 grand.
Totally.
And it scared the hell out of me.
I know.
Right.
And that anxiety is, you know, something you have to personally like kind of, you know, wrestle with. And that's why I think there's such an enduring appeal to these muscle cars, is because you said, like, you can work on them. Part of the joy of owning them is working on them. They're very, very cheap to maintain.
Yeah.
And, you know, the 300ZX, it's a much more sophisticated car. It's much more refined. It's really, really fun. But again, there, you got to have a guy.
Right.
And you have to factor that into your calculations when you're thinking about, you know, a collector car or something to keep. Like even a Miata is, you know,
they're old now.
Yeah, they're old, but they're not like a Camaro.
Right. But let me ask you, do you think, I mean, with the older cars, like, you know, especially American stuff, right? The aftermarket has jumped on board with that, and you could literally buy almost everything that you want. For cars like the Supras, the Zs, Celicas, RX-7s, things like that, are there, and you might know better than I do, are there those aftermarket parts warehouses that are now developing new parts for those that you know of? Is there a massive aftermarket like there is for classic American stuff for the JDM side? Is that stuff readily available for the budding enthusiast? It is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, suspension pieces and brake pieces and brake sets and kits and all that stuff. But to me, and tell me what you think of this, Mike, like I think we're getting to a point, and we're certainly there now, where the OE has such better tuning capabilities and so much more software at their disposal, and they're tuning the cars to a level that no aftermarket part is going to approach.
Great.
And it really started with like some of the factory tuned things like AMGs and M cars, and I think you see it all through the industry now. Like you're not going to improve on the new Supra. Like
nope.
That thing is just so dialed, and it's so great, and it's so like these tiny little refinements and nuances of that car's handling. That's real genius. You have to be amazing to get to that level. And so to me, like there's a certain point at which, and I don't know what the year is, where I'm just going fully stock.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about that. I mean, when the pro touring stuff first came on about 20 years ago, right? You could take an old car and you could enhance it and you could make it 1,000 times better. No question. Because those cars were garbage out of the gate, right? They're crap.
They were all lightly engineered. We said.
Right. Yeah. Lightly. Now, to your point, the OEMs are spending billions on perfecting these cars. And I'm sorry, but Frank down in SoCal is not out engineering the engineers at Porsche. I'm sorry, it's not happening.
It's not happening.
You might be able to say, well, I'm going to make this possibly handle a little better by doing this. But in doing so, you are detracting from whatever that car's mission statement was originally.
It's like tires, right? The OE tire on your car is going to have the best compromise available that, all the data in the world has informed that spec on that tire. And cars are like that now. Like they have so much data at their disposal. They're able to just tune things on the fly too, and with software. And they've got tons of VIR hours, tons of ring hours, tons of development hours on like at the limit. Just think about renting VIR so you can like test and tune.
Sure.
For 100 hours.
Right. That's fine.
Do that. Yeah. Right. So it's like these guys are at a different level, and the OEs are at a different level now. And I don't know exactly when I can't put a year to that, but it's probably somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s where it's like going stock. The other point I wanted to make, and is to pick up on your insurance conversation with your guy, and I don't mean to shift gears too quickly, but
no,
I think we're having this discussion at an excellent time, because everybody's saying, every financial guy is saying that the bottom's going to fall out of the market, or is happening now. Things are going to get cheaper. There's a recession coming. If you have cash now and you want to buy something, this is probably the peak of the market. Don't buy that, 993 now. Don't buy that Supra, or what else is don't buy that Integra Type R,
right?
And I think, like I really want an NSX, man, and maybe I'll get one day. And I'm just trying to keep some money in reserve. And you just have to have a little stash going.
There's no question about that. And I think that, for going even further back, when you said cars are not investments, cars are investments if you are fortunate and you get lucky and you don't view them as an investment. I never purchased my Chargers for investment reasons. I purchased them out of joy. Now, I was fortunate in the fact that they escalated in value. Right. Due to, for a number of television, movies, those cars were, it's for me, it was always all about buying the right car.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're looking at, like, I just happen to like Chargers. That's what I liked. Now, if I would have said, you know what, I can't wait to go out and buy a Dart. Well, that's cool. If that's what you dig, then go out and buy it and put your money into it and enjoy it. But don't be upset if the value doesn't escalate in the same way as other models.
You're never going to make money on a Corvette. But if you love a
No,
Corvair,
then
they're
God
great.
bless.
They're great.
Take it.
Right.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
totally agree with that philosophy. And like sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. And
Right.
sometimes you sell too fast and you didn't hold on to something that you should
Right.
have. But
Right.
if like your guiding principle is love and joy and just like wanting something to
Yeah.
connect with, you sort of never go wrong. Because even if you lose money on it, you still get
Still
that deal.
happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this. So with the cars that are coming out now, like you said, we are at the peak of automotive technology. I just watched a review of the new Z06.
Yeah. Incredible.
John,
Incredible car.
I mean,
Outrageous.
did you drive it? Did you get to
Yes.
go to
Yeah.
see? I hate you so much. I don't hate you, but I'm so jealous right now. So I watched one of the reviews and I was like, there is nothing that an enthusiast is going to build that is going to come remotely close to that car. I watched the reviews and I was like, Jesus Christ, that thing is unbelievable.
I mean, it's a real Halo car. I mean, GM, that LT6 is only in that car. Flat
Right.
plane crank, it's incredible. And the thing sounds so mean and insane. And
So it was that good then.
it's incredible. I mean, it's like it's up there with and this is what is so cool, I think, about the C8 is that it's really a drivable everyday kind of supercar. I think the C8 is like, the everyman's McLaren 720.
I love the C8. When I had just a 3LT, base, whatever it was, fell in love with it. And we had it for a couple of weeks. And I was like, this is spectacular. It's comfortable. It's fast. It's got trunk space. I'm like, I never in a million years thought that I would say I would 1000% buy this car. I would absolutely buy a C8 Corvette.
I mean, we had a long-termer at Current Driver. I drove that thing all over the place. Like every weekend we were going on long drives. It was so comfortable. The MR dampers are incredible in that car. The shift quality is just like silky smooth. I mean, it is incredible. It sounds great. And I think the C8, what's so cool about the C8 is that it's sort of like an NSX or a McLaren, where it's like, it's not a Lamborghini. It's not like saying, here I am, and it's loud, and it's annoying, and it's bothersome. And the Z06 is like that too. You can crank it up to that level of like total antisocial, ridiculousness. But if you just want to, like, it's still fun at 30 miles an hour.
Oh,
absolutely. Like amazing,
Yeah.
It's a huge, huge achievement. And it's like, it's a hypercar, dude, for $100,000.
Dude, that's the price point of that car is astonishing, right? I look at some of the stuff that I have and I'm like, oh Jesus, I should probably just sell it and get one of these. But again, the emotional attachment to me is huge. But let me ask you, do you think that, like, now we're looking back, you and I are looking back, and we're looking back, say 30 years, right? We're going back to the 90s and the Integras, the twin turbo Zs, the Supras, all those cars. Do you think that in 30 years, people are going to go back and look at these Z06s? And in 30 years, we're going EV, right? So it's you don't talk about a unicorn. It's really going to be a unicorn. But do you think the enthusiasm is really going to be there? And more importantly, do you think the aftermarket will always be there for cars like that, as they are for the classic cars that we love today?
I think so, Mike, because there's always going to be teenagers, and they're always going to have posters on their walls, and they're always going to be in high school wanting a Z06 or, a 296 or a 458. And I think that people are just going to, I mean, a lot of those cars are going to atrophy and drop off, but there will be a bunch of them around. People are still going to love them and still keep them in good shape, and I really believe we'll still be able to drive them. And this transition between ICE and EV is going to be a long time coming. And I mean, look, the first hybrid Prius what year was that?
90 something, 96.
Yeah. So look, we're still kind of in that hybrid era, right?
Right.
It's going to take a long time. And I think the aftermarket will always be there to support enthusiasts, as they have done from the Iskandarian days, and it's just like, it's a great business and people love it. And it's so full of passion and great people, and it just propels the whole thing forward. And so, what's going to be the golden era? What are we going to look at as a golden era? I think it'll be different for everybody. To me, it's like that 2000s when everything had thin A pillars and naturally aspirated engines and great hydraulic power steering, and all those things that combine to make cars really, really communicative and really, really like sensitive. And Integrat's a great example. Like, who would have thought a front drive chassis could be that good?
Right.
And so that to me is my era. But I'm sure like my kids' friends, they're gonna be into, I don't know,
right,
that kind of stuff. But
all right, so well, let me ask you, because I know we're coming up on an hour, which is unbelievable. This is a problem. Every time I talk to you, it's just like, oh, that's an hour. That's quick. Shit, okay. All right. So for the budding collector, the budding enthusiast, what wonderful words of Eddie Alterman wisdom would you give to the first time collector car buyer, regardless of decade of what they want?
I think follow your heart is number one. Number two is have extra money around. Buy what you can afford, but factor in repair replacement around that. And that that scales with time. Like a 68 Camaro is not going to be as expensive to maintain as a 300ZX.
Right.
And then my third thing is use it and drive it. The best maintenance there is driving these cars. Keep the fluids moving, keep the rubber activated. You know what I mean? And just use them.
Well, I think I'm not going to add anything, because I think those are exactly the things that I try to go by. I think those points are all fantastic. And I think that's it. Drive them, use them, enjoy them. If there's one thing I would always say, I never try to save anything I buy for the next owner. Screw that guy. Like, I don't care about him. Use it up, right? Like, give it away when it's tired and worn out. Same way. Like, what's that thing? Like, when you die, you should die penniless, and that's right. Stiff the guy at the cemetery because your check bounced, right?
Run out. My dad says, run out of breath and dollars at the same moment.
Yep. I like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, Eddie, thank you so much for coming on. It is always such a pleasure.
Dude, I love being on here, Mike. Love talking to you. Thank you so much. Dude.
And a couple of weeks, we got SEMA coming up, right?
I'll see you there.
Wonderful. And that's it. And, obviously, this is a Hemmings podcast. We've got 9 billion cars on there. I over-exaggerated, but we got a lot. We got like 25,000 cars online. Go check them out. Check out the auction. Get your first collector car. Don't think too hard about it. Again, this is an emotional purchase that should be fun. If it's not fun, you're going about it the wrong way. So that's it.
That's the gospel. That's the gospel according to Musto, and it's spot on.
All right, everyone. We will see you next time on the Hot Rod Barbecue. Eddie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.